War today is the opposite of what it was 100 years ago. 100 years ago, 90% of casualties in war were male soldiers and 10% were civilians. And now it's the opposite. 90% of people killed in war are civilians, women, children, and male civilians, casualties. And that it's actually become more dangerous to be a woman in a war zone than to be a soldier, which is extraordinary. And that's a story that really nobody's telling. So we're going all over the world to tell a global story, and then Pray the Devil Back to Hell will be the kickoff for the series. But we're going to look at the disproportionate impact of war on women, and also at their leadership role that they're playing in often unrecognized ways to prevent conflict, be part of the talks at the peace table. Right now, something like 3% of peace talks involve women. We're following a story right now in Afghanistan. We're about to send, probably start filming it any minute now, where the women are trying to get into the peace talks that Karzai is going to have in April. Right now, they're not in the room. And they weren't in the room. Well, there was one in the room in London because somebody got a hold of the guest list and said, no women. So that's something we're looking at. So we're looking in very positive ways at ways that women are challenging impunity, helping forge new laws around the rules of engagement in war, but also at what the reality is of the impact of war on women.
Biggest and most important jobs is to teach these kids to be critical consumers of media, to not simply accept what's handed to them, but to really ask themselves, am I getting the whole story? Where do I go? How do I assess the authority and the viability of sources? It's so unfortunate that just the sheer number of images that they're stuffed with by the time they're in the 5th grade that are violent, that are disrespectful, that are racist, that are sexist, that are homophobic. So yeah, I try not to wallow, as tempting as it is to do, but Pray the Devil Back to Hell led inexorably into Women, War, and Peace, precisely for this reason. That, like, I may not have the power to fix all the media, but I do have the capacity to make good media. And I do have the capacity to partner with public broadcasting, which is not tainted by the profit motive, which is clearly been an enormous, enormous driver of the deterioration in the media that we're getting. Particularly news. And it seemed possible in this case with partners who really understand and believe the importance of what we're doing, which is hard because, you know, it costs a lot to make media. And so you have to know that this theory that you have is right, or the idea that you have is valid, or that anybody's going to come and watch it. So you need partners who are willing to be bold, who are willing to step out. And what we're going to try and do in Women, War, and Peace is to take what we have always been told is the background, the sort of irrelevant collateral damage, the rest of the story of the war that isn't very important, and we're going to say, no, actually, this is the foreground. You know, politicians, leaders, they should be serving the people who make the world go around. And the people who make the world go around are women and the men they partner with, who feed and clothe and shelter and house and heal and bury. That's the stuff of life. And that's what's happening the whole time a war is going on. What's interesting is that we had one moment, they sing this song, the women, that Liberia is my home. And so CNN had no record of them being there. But one of the moments of the film that really cracks me up is we've lifted some audio from one of the CNN archival pieces that they sent us, and it was basically just the videographer was setting up a shot. So it's an empty chair, and there's a guy in the background that you can hear fussing with the shot, and he's whistling the song, Liberia is my home. And so they were there. It was only a question of just turning the camera this much. It's really extraordinary to me how little imagination is brought to the job of telling us the story. And I think that if we all have the whole story, frankly, I think we'll make different decisions.
The story that Abby and Ginny tell with the film, Pray the Devil Back to Hell, is one of hundreds of stories that the Global Fund for Women has been privileged to have heard from women themselves in those communities. And I think we have felt privileged. We first heard from Lema and her sisters in Liberia in 2003 when they wrote to us saying, we have this idea, we want to organize, we want to bring together more and more women, and we need some basic resources to be able to do this. And the Global Fund made a small grant together with another sister fund, the African Women's Development Fund, to support Lema and her sisters in being able to do the mobilizing work, to get messages out, to hire a van, to get to the places they needed to. But I think what is so powerful about the message that this story tells and why it was so profound for us as an organization is we have access to this information because women's organizations write to us from 170 countries around the world. It's been really hard to share that information in turn with a much broader audience. And what Pray the Devil Back to Hell allowed us to do, and Abby was sharing that she shared this in Bosnia, but she has shared it with groups of recipients of Global Fund grants. So women's organizing groups, girls' organizations, all over the world. And what they see is their experience validated. So that the Association of Girls Who Took on Sexual Abuse in Schools in Zimbabwe, which was an organization, the Girl Child Network, that the Global Fund made its first grant to in 1998, when they see this movie, it is a testimony to not just the work of the women of Liberia, but is also acknowledgement of what they have done. And I can speak to the fact that I think in terms of young people's response to this film, there's something about the film that is so activist in nature. I think what is so powerful about the message that this story tells and why it was so profound for us as an organization is while we have access to this information because women's organizations write to us from 170 countries around the world, it's been really hard to share that information in turn with a much broader audience. And what Pray the Devil Back to Hell allowed us to do, and Abby was sharing that she shared this in Bosnia, but she has shared it with groups of recipients of Global Fund grants. So women's organizing groups, girls' organizations, all over the world. And what they see is their experience validated. So that the Association of Girls Who Took on Sexual Abuse in Schools in Zimbabwe, which was an organization, the Girl Child Network, that the Global Fund made its first grant to in 1998, when they see this movie, it is a testimony to not just the work of the women of Liberia, but is also acknowledgement of what they have done. And I can speak to the fact that I think in terms of young people's response to this film, there's something about the film that is so activist in nature that when we have shown it, and I, like Abby, am the mother of a teenager myself, my daughter is 16, she sat, she came to the film very reluctantly. I had to drag her, that it was being, shown in. It's like, it's one more of your protests. No, it wasn't a protest. I was, come and see the movie. And she brought a friend with her, and the two of them just sat mesmerized by the film. And walked up to Abby and to Lema, who was in the audience speaking with them afterwards, and just said, we want to take this film to our high school, we want to share it, we want to be able to tell more about it. And I think, Abby suggested one reason, but I think the other reason is something that is just a little bit more raw than that. It has great music, it has very strong, I'm actually really serious, it has really strong images, it has a sense of people actually doing stuff and not talking. So it's, even though it is a movie, I think for a lot of young people, a lot of the things that we show them is lots and lots of talking. And in this movie, there's lots of doing. And yes, it actually does have the kinds of things which attract young men as well. And I say that in a very strange way, which is it has young men with guns in the movie. And while that is one of the things that the movie is actually talking about how damaging that is, part of what draws young people in is it actually shows footage of that, but then it talks about it in a way that allows them in the process of the movie to come to a different place and be like, wow, that's kind of not that cool, actually. It's kind of scary, but not in a lecturing way. And so I guess those have been my experiences that I just wanted to share back. And I think something that for a lot of us who do nonprofit work, we forget the power, just the raw, visceral power of images and media, and how much that speaks to young people, because they have so much access to that, which in ways that tell very different stories than this one.
I think you make such interesting points about why, this particular film has touched students. We've seen over the years that we've been working on global subjects at wide angle, which are always told through very human stories rather than sort of reportage. They're really the experience of people in countries that, most of us don't get a chance to go to, and certainly most school kids. And we hear so often from teachers that kind of feedback, saying that their students watch these films and it opens up a world for them. I mean, it's one thing to read a report and find out that something like half of the world's population lives at under $3 a day in abject poverty. That's something you write and you memorize and you put back in a test, but that these films really have the power to reach out and draw you in, and that students have very strong reactions. They have a strong feeling of justice. This is wrong. We've done and then of responsibility. What can I do? And why do I get to live in this country? And take certain things for granted. We've been doing a series since 2003 at Wide Angle called Time for School, where we go to 7 countries, and we've been following 7 kids since 2003 when they started their first day of school. We're going to take them through to their intended graduation in 2015. And 5 of them are in countries where it's really, really hard to even get to school. Or to make it to 5th grade is practically a miracle, especially for girls. But we're looking at boys and girls in this ongoing project. And teachers call us up and tell us the most amazing things. There's a teacher in Long Island who now uses it at the beginning of her 7th grade school year. And she said, yes, I'm doing it because I want them to learn about these different countries, but I'm also doing it because I started noticing that the kids in my classes didn't want to work hard, and they felt, they're not really doing their homework, and watching this makes them feel like, I'm so lucky that I get to go to school. It's actually a privilege. It's not something that everybody gets to wake up and do in other countries, and it's not fair. Actually, her kids have ended up, she called us about 8 times. We have to get in touch with that school in Kenya. And now her school is in touch with the school in Kenya, and they're raising $15,000 to build a library, because they realize that the kids in the school in Kenya, not only did they not have any books, they didn't have a library, they didn't have anything. They share books at school, all piling over and reading off of one page. Nobody gets to bring the book home, so you don't get too far that way. So that's just one small example, but that's been, I think, so I think that in general, it's just an extraordinary resource for American school kids.